Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gabriel Motzkin. I'm the director of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, and I am very happy to open this event. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to shut down your cell phones so that we can hear the speakers. And then, because it is my want, I will say a couple of words. First of all, I want to thank the Hans Seidel Stiftung for cooperating with us in this event. I think it's a very important event. It has a lot of impact, and we're happy to do our annual budget conference. And I'm happy to greet Professor Christos Kolias, who will speak to us on the subject of does defense expenditure stimulate growth. When I took basic economics close to 50 years ago, everybody thought that it did stimulate growth. But of course, there are two problems with any government program. And I'll just tell you what my two issues with government programs are, and then I'll leave you to yourselves. The first is cost-plus financing. Cost-plus financing I encountered as the dean when I had to deal with the medical faculty, because the medical faculty would always tell me why their programs are more expensive. And then I thought about it, and I realized their programs were always more expensive because they insisted on buying the most expensive machinery possible. Now, if you think about that, think about what it would mean if you're opening a used clothing store to have a Rolls Royce stationed in the middle of that store, because you don't know whether you need the equipment, you don't need the equipment, nobody's there, there's no criteria for why you should have that particular piece of equipment. And one of the things that if you look at the defense budget in the United States, you notice is that nobody can tell you whether they need Polaris submarines or whether they need ICBMs or whether they need the IRBMs. And you have no idea what's necessary and what's not. That's one problem. The second problem I'll define as unfortunate overregulation, and I don't know any answer to it. Let me tell you a story. When I was running a research center, I raised money from a donor in the United States to take guests to expensive restaurants. I got a donation just to take guests to expensive restaurants. And that was the money I could use. Unfortunately, the university said that they had to authorize every expense over 200 shekels. So it was caught up in a bureaucracy. I had to pay. I didn't get my money back for 6 months, if ever. And in the meantime, this money was lying there that had been given for that purpose alone. So here is the example of what I call overregulation. I don't know the solution to that problem either, because you don't want somebody saying, great, I got an account, I'm going to spend it all on one meal in London, or something like that. But at the same time, there is an issue in any form of not-for-profit spending of what is a proper expense and not a proper expense. It's something that I deal with every day when I ask what, as director, what do I charge my institute and what do I pay out of my pocket? And this is not an easy issue to decide sometimes, you know, when you take guests or when you don't take guests and all the rest. So those are the two issues, cost plus and overregulation. If you come up with the solutions to them, please let me know. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Richard Asbeck, who is the local representative of the Hans Seidel Stiftung, to open. And then after that, we're going to ask the speaker and his chairman to come up. Please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Motzkin. Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. Just a small welcome on the part of Hans Seidel Foundation. It's the third time now that Hans Seidel Foundation is supporting the annual budget conference of the Economics and Society program at the Van Leer Institute. And like today, our support includes the invitation of a speaker from abroad. 2 years ago, we had a speaker from the Institute of Employment Research who talked about how to integrate long-term unemployed into workforce. Last year, there was a gentleman from Bertelsmann Foundation in Germany who talked about a comparative study defining social justice and comparing the situation in Israel with member states of the European Union or the OECD countries. You see, in a way, we are part of the German Hasbara. But this does not hinder us to also invite once in a while a speaker from another European Union member state, especially in times where the European Union has faced some difficult moments. So I'm most happy that Professor Christos Kolias from the University of Thessaly in Greece, he has responded positively to our invitation that he's going to talk about the nexus between military expenditure and economic growth. Thank you, Professor Colliers, for having come and taking up this invitation. Having said that, just allow me to mention a few words about German defense expenditure. The state budget of Germany contains a lot of defense expenditures for the security of Israel. In recent years, the German government subsidized submarines and other navy vessels, which Israel has purchased from us with hundreds of millions of euros per year. How many exactly? Nobody really knows, or you have to rely, as they in Israel say, to foreign media. At least I tried to look up into our state budget, and I found some very strange section there, which is called Allgemeine Verwaltungsvorschriften, German Financial Administration. And in this section, you find a lot of extraordinary payments, for instance, the pension for the German post office, or the costs for euro coinage, or some recurrent costs which are still stemming from German reunification, and yes, once in a while also an Israeli submarine. I can assure you that this support for the Israeli submarines and the other military expenditure is much, much higher than what other official German foundations are providing for supporting civil society and academia here in Israel, for activities like this one for instance. And I can assure you that, I can assure to the supporters of the incumbent NGO law that the accountancy and the transparency of our support is at least as high as the one of the German military aid given to Israel. And also the recipients, they do already account for their money they receive from us in a very strict manner. They report everything to authorities, and over-regulation is there also a topic, I would say. With this, I think, regardless of any kind of odd, additional and unnecessary scrutiny which is being put up to our efforts, and I think that our cooperation will continue and that we can see many more cooperation and conferences here. And with this, I'm looking much forward to today's conference, which talks about military expenditure, economic growth, and transparency. Thank you very much.
Professor Strawczynski, Professor Colliers.
So I'll start in Hebrew, some words, and then I will present you. Okay.
I'm very happy to open our 7th conference of the Van Leer Economic and Social Conference. We think that in light of the number of deliberations and discussions, again, it's not so big. In a topic that is extremely important, a lot of decisions are taken once a year, but I see at least 3 irregularities or problems in terms of decision making in the past years. For example, last year in the state of Israel, there's this overall expenditure that is decided upon, and last year it was decided to sort of suppress or do away with that order as if it does not exist. And it was correct to do that at the time, as we said in last year's conference, that the needs in terms of expenditure in the state of Israel are extremely significant, and that is why the decision that was taken was a correct one. However, part of what we are trying to bring to discussion today, as was mentioned before, transparency, for example, I think the question can be asked, is this the right way of conducting ourselves? Another example is that oftentimes decisions are taken as a response to protests. There are protests that go on, and as a response to that, decisions are taken. I think a very famous, again, example is the social protest. We were all familiar with that. We can mention another 2 in terms of education, for example, the sardines protest, as it was called in Israel, with the very packed classrooms. And We also see in the periphery protests in recent days, which is related to all sorts of problems, many of which have to do with the budget. And the third point that I wish to make is in terms of security. In terms of security, I think every year we see that when this discussion over the budget takes place, there is a discussion that takes place. All the ministers convene. It's a very meaningful discussion because everybody tries to understand what the discussion will be and what the annual budget will be for each ministry, except for one ministry, which is the Ministry of Defense. Because the Ministry of Defense knows that every decision taken during that discussion are not necessarily those decisions that will be relevant at the end of the discussion. So later on, other additional decisions are taken in transferring surpluses, reserves, things that happen during the year. And oftentimes, this is necessary. If there is a military operation that they do not know of in advance, so of course they have to get extra budget. I'm not even only talking about that, but even relating to the very big question. Lately, it was decided that the defense budget will stay on a certain level. And again, the various players, including the ministers that ever take part in that discussion, do they really believe this will be the situation at the end of the day? So this year, we thought it would be one of the meaningful topics. We decided to focus on it. And if, we've decided to focus on it, maybe the best way to do so is by, again, giving an overall picture about this topic in the world. And fortunately for us, there is a wonderful speaker here, and I will introduce him in English in just a moment. But before I do so, let me just say, again, a word. As I was asked, there are people who can see our conference through the internet. So this year, when we get to the questions and answers, some of them will be done through the Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, you can also ask questions on Facebook. Some people here will try and will go through the question, we'll look at them on Facebook, and we'll try to respond to them. Some of the questions will be after our guest speaker, and then we will have the part of presenting our own alternative plan in terms of a concrete proposal and what the budget is supposed to look like, and you can ask questions there as well. And of course, at the end of the panel, there will be time for questions as well.